In this video, I'd like to introduce you to the practice of Lectio Divina, also known as divine reading. Now, this is a contemplative practice that can help us gain a deeper understanding of Scripture. It consists of multiple parts, each of which is designed to help open our hearts to the deeper meaning of Scripture, deeper than perhaps what we would get from an academic consideration of the Bible and what it means. So I'll talk about what Lectio Divina is, and then I will break down the different parts so that you can start to incorporate it into your meditation practice. So Lectio Divina is a very ancient practice, thought to date back all the way back to the Desert Fathers, and it is something that's practiced by monastic communities all over the world. It is a way of reading Scripture in a contemplative rather than academic manner. As I indicated before, rather than pondering the academic meaning of the words or how they were translated or their etymology, we are instead invited into a deeper, heart-centered relationship with the Scripture through contemplating it in the presence of God. So this is something that, even though it's a monastic practice, we can quite easily do at home. You just need to find a few quiet moments and a quiet space where you won't be disturbed. And you also need to find a piece of Scripture that you wish to read. Now, the general recommendation for this is to use the epistles and the gospels that are appointed for the week or for the particular festival day. And that way, you can use the church's calendar and the scriptures in order to help build the story of Christ into your life and into your annual routine. So after you've chosen a piece of scripture and you've found a quiet place and some quiet time, you can dive into the practice. So in the next section, I'll talk about what this practice actually involves and how you can perform it. So Lectio Divina is divided into 4 stages, and each of these stages is designed to bring us into a closer and deeper understanding of the scripture that we're reading. The stages are Lectio, or reading, Meditatio, meditation, Oratio, prayer, and Contemplatio, contemplation. Now, I'll talk about what each of these stages involves. So, starting with Lectio, this stage is pretty self-explanatory. It is the reading stage. But the important thing to remember here is to read the scripture that we've chosen slowly. Don't rush things. Just go through it slowly, word by word, and let it sink in and let it speak to you. In particular, if there's any bits of the scripture that resonate with you, that awaken your heart, that you feel very strongly about, then keep these in mind. Let these thoughts happen. Then we move into the second part, which is meditatio, where we consider the meaning of the scripture. But again, like I mentioned at the start, instead of thinking necessarily about academic things like the etymology of words, just keep repeating these parts of the scripture that resonated with you over and over and see what it says to you. See what comes out. This can be a process that takes a few minutes, or you can spend longer doing it if you have the time and if you so wish. You'll probably find that when you first start doing this practice, you can really only spend a couple of minutes doing this before you really get distracted. But as you do this practice more and more and get used to it, You might find that you can actually spend a good solid 10 or 15 minutes meditating on the meaning of the scripture that you've just read. And during this time, another thing to think about is, what would you like to say to God in response to this scripture? And that brings us to the third part, which is oratio, or prayer. Now, in this part, this can actually be quite short, or it can be a little bit longer. But this is really the response. The first part of the practice, the reading and the meditation, are where we allow the scripture to sink in and we allow God to talk to us. But then in oratio, the third part, we actually respond. So the prayer that we say in response, it can really be anything. It can be a prayer of thanksgiving or gratitude for the words that we have read. We might ask God for strength to live by his law, or whatever it is that came out and that resonated with us. So in this part, it's generally a good idea to compose a little prayer, a personal prayer preferably, and say that, in your head to God. And then after you've said this prayer, we move on to the last part, which is contemplatio. In contemplatio, we just rest in God's presence. So we've done our reading, we've meditated on it, we've said our little prayer, and now we just rest in God's presence. So what exactly does this mean? Now, I'll do a future video about the cloud of unknowing, which describes a very detailed method of Christian contemplation. Well, I say detailed, but it's actually quite simple. But essentially, what this part is about resting in God's presence while not thinking about the world. Now, we can't leave aside all thoughts of the world. They're going to come naturally. We're going to think, oh, I forgot to take the rubbish out. Or we might think about something that happened at work or something that somebody said about us. But the important thing about this is not that these thoughts don't come. That's never going to happen. But it's about how we deal with these thoughts. And during contemplation, we let those thoughts go. Now, in the cloud of unknowing, the author talks about the cloud of forgetting, about imagining a cloud under which we just move all of these thoughts of the world when they come. So we can do something similar during Lectio. But another thing that we can do is we can actually take the benefit of the first three parts. So there might have been a word that resonated with us, or a few words that resonated with us. Whenever we get distracted, we might just come back to that word and repeat it in our heads. And that then helps bring us back into the practice and back into God's presence. Now, as with meditatio, how long you spend doing contemplation might vary. You might only be able to maintain it for a few minutes, or alternatively, you might spend half an hour in this step. It's entirely up to you. And the time that you spend will no doubt vary depending on your experience level with meditation, and also on just how much time you can devote for practice. But it's generally a good idea to try and spend at least a few minutes doing this. And then after you've finished contemplation, you close out however you wish to close out, and you can return to the rest of your day. I personally find that Lectio Divina is a very good practice for reading scripture and trying to get to the heart of what that scripture actually means. We can argue about translations and etymology, and what Jesus meant when he said this thing or that. And there's countless hours that have been spent by theologians debating these things. But that doesn't necessarily give us a personal relationship with the words. That is what Lectio Divina is for. It is for cultivating that personal relationship with God and His Scripture. So it's a practice that I really commend to you, and it will help you open your heart and become a better Christian.